Hi and welcome to Who Really Cares. My name is Nikki and this podcast is brought to you by Carers in Bedfordshire. We're a registered charity that provides support to unpaid carers across Bedfordshire in the UK. We're here to help as unpaid carers struggle through the many difficulties of being a carer. Research shows that the caring community in this country saves the government $162 billion a year. By providing care for their loved ones. But this obviously often comes at a cost to their own physical, mental and financial health. So we as a charity are here to help and support them so that they can keep caring for as long as possible. Now, from meeting and chatting with carers, one of the things that they mention most is that they don't feel valued or even heard. So that's why this podcast now exists. We will be talking to a variety of carers, giving them a voice if you like, and hearing about some of the realities of what they do. We will also hear about how those in charge could help to ease their burden in some way. And one of the other reasons for this podcast is that carers can listen to other stories and perhaps not feel so alone. As the other thing that we hear is that caring is often a very isolating thing. So anyway, one way or another, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Today, I'll be talking to Mark. Mark cares for his 21-year-old son, Zach. Zach has really complex needs, and caring for him is definitely a full-time job. So Mark's wife goes out and works full-time to pay the family bills, which leaves Mark as the main carer for Zach. So let's hear from Mark. So, Mark, thank you for joining me today. Very nice to have you here.
Nice to be
my
here.
first question I always ask was, how was your caring day yesterday?
Intrusive.
What, my question or the role?
We could go either way on that. Caring role sounds like something that you step out of every now and again. I mean, you have been an actress. I don't know if you still do, but you have been an actress. You know that you do a role for a certain time and then you stop.
Yes.
The trouble is with this, it's an ongoing show.
Yeah.
It's matinees, it's evening performances. It just goes on and on and on. Just as a kind of a mental health treat for myself, I go into a recording studio once a month and just sing through some of my old material on computer. Now, my son got kicked out of school when he was 14. So for the last 6 years, I've had to take him in with me, which means that all the way through me singing, I've got the sound of him bouncing on a ball, usually twanging a balloon or throwing a ball at me, making strange noises all the way through. And if I give him sweets, he'll either rub them in his hair or throw them all over the floor. So it's become less pleasurable than it used to do.
Does it still give you any sort of pleasure, though, or do you find it almost like you do it because you always did it and you don't want to stop?
I have to say it is getting to that stage where it's just becoming a bit of a chore, if nothing else. I mean, it's just like inflating the ball, carrying the ball down there, having to make sure I've got stuff for him. It does take a lot of the pleasure out of it. This is something I used to do when he was at special school, and it was just an hour, 2 hours of me just singing.
Yeah.
And that's quite a nice thing. I can do it. I can move air in a pleasant way, and it feels good to be able to reconnect with that. I can't join anything like a choir because I'd never be able to dedicate the time to it.
Yeah.
And then when that kind of element of privacy is taken away from you,
yes,
you do your best. You try to work around it, but often you come out of it afterwards thinking, "Why did I do that? That was a complete waste of time." I didn't get anything from that. I was managing behaviour, or I was waiting for the next thing to go wrong, or something like that.
Because you don't get any time off at all, do you?
No. I mean, it's funny enough. The guy who runs the studio is quite a ready wit, and he saw me carrying this massive exercise ball in at the same time as I was holding hands with my son. He says, "Oh, you brought the ball and chain with you, have you?" Now, he meant the exercise ball, but I took it to mean the other thing. Not very charitable, my point of view, but And then I have to say, I got home yesterday, and it's the end of the school holidays. My wife went back to school. She's a teacher None of the kids are at school anymore, but my role doesn't change for 6 weeks. It's just more complicated because there are more people in the house usually.
Yes.
So yesterday afternoon, I collapsed. I mean, I was just wiped out energy-wise in a way that I haven't been for a long, long time. And I think it was just that kind of, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. There's no reason to keep going. And I was absolutely exhausted. So, I then had to drag myself up, make an evening meal and look vaguely interested while people were telling me about their day.
Yeah.
But
it is
timing.
Relentless is what I think of. It comes to mind when you talk about your caring, because it just
I think everybody's is. It's just that we measure the gaps in between crises like other people do the gaps between tasks or jobs. So, if I can go for an entire afternoon without him getting cross about something or throwing a cushion across the room or throwing a cushion at me, that's bliss. But I'm still caring. I'm still having to be in the same room. Yeah. Now, if he's really in a bad mood and he's doing all the kind of horrible stimming and the one that he's just really angry about something, then that's your whole afternoon, your evening is coloured by that. And so although you're not actually doing anything, you are being bathed in this behaviour all the time, which is in itself stressful.
Yeah, and waiting for I like how you described that. It's like waiting for the next catastrophe or the next crisis. Which
even when we go on holiday, it's the same thing. Going on holiday is doing exactly the same thing somewhere else. I still have to get him up. I still have to bathe him. I still have to change him. I still have to entertain him. I still have to stop him chewing through something that he shouldn't be chewing through or breaking something that he shouldn't be breaking.
Yeah. It's never a holiday. It's just a change of geography.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Just the change of geography can be refreshing in itself, but it's never a complete break. You come back thinking, right, now I need the holiday. Because I've also had to pack and remember to take the nappies, remember to take this, remember to take that. And if you don't take something, then you've got to go scouting around the local neighbourhood for something, which might not be readily available in the middle of nowhere. It's just on and you forget. And it's strangely when you're talking to other people and they'll say, oh, we just popped out to the pub last night for a quick half. You're thinking, I can't do that. I can't remember the last time we did something that impulsive because that would interfere with what he's expecting from the day. Even if we did pop down to the pub or something like that, he'd sit there with a glass of water with ice cubes in it, and the entire evening would last for the duration of the time it took him to crunch every single ice cube. Then he wants to go. Otherwise, he starts throwing things around and being obnoxious. He's the only person I know who goes to a pub, only drinks ice water and can still get obnoxious. Normally it takes a little bit more heavy stuff than that.
So, Mark, apart from the singing, what do you do to give yourself a break?
I've been creative, pretty much all my life, so what I tend to do is just move from one area of creativity to another one. So if I can't do the music, I'll try and do a bit of writing or I'll try and do something else. Actually, if I just need an afternoon off because I'm exhausted, I will just put a film on and I will just slightly veg out. I don't know if PCs still do this, but they used to defrag every so often. You'd have to put them into a program where they kind of like reformatted themselves and is a kind of boring process to watch, but that's exactly what it is. It's like my head's all over the place. I'm exhausted. I need to get all of this data in the right places and then I might be able to function again. I've spent, I think 2 nights away from him in 6 years, one of which was for my sister and brother-in-law's 70th birthday party, and another one was when my mum was dying. One was a nice event, one not so nice. But it's difficult. He relies on me for a lot of things. He's fine with his mum, but there's a difference. He will only take a certain amount of care from her, and he doesn't want to be changed by her, etc. So that kind of does put me in the frame a lot of the time. So it doesn't mean that I can just not be there for a long time. It has to be in a small window during a day.
Yeah.
So actually just relaxing, very little, just jumping from one more pleasant task to another pleasant task is how I try and rest, I suppose.
Right. And I mean, you've obviously been a carer since he was born, and he's how old now?
He's 20.
And so has it obviously evolved over that time? You've kind of adapted and got used to it, or has it got more difficult over that time?
Both,
Right.
frankly. When we first realised there was some kind of issue, he was already kind of high energy, 18 months, 2 years. And then for the next 4 years, he obliterated us, I think. He'd never slept well. And he didn't sleep through until he was about 6. I mean, the way I always think about it is if you've ever seen the film Saving Private Ryan, the
Yep.
first 20 minutes of that are famous for being just kinetic maelstrom of slaughter and mayhem.
Yes.
That's what it felt like. He
Oh
would
my
eat
God.
everything he wasn't supposed to eat. He'd break everything he wasn't supposed to break. He would climb up this, climb up that, throw himself on the floor, have complete fits. He's in the room looking at me now, and he knows I'm talking about him because he's got a lovely smile on his face. But he's saying, "Oh God, those were the days." He's nostalgic for this. We couldn't have a plant in the house because you'd leave the room for 2 seconds and the plant would be in 20 different pieces and soil all over the place. You couldn't have anything. My daughter's artwork, if she left it out, he'd rip it up. My daughter and my wife made a chocolate cake once and he spread it all over the ceiling of the kitchen. Innumerable times I would cook and find small toys in the bottom of the soup or the stew or whatever I was making, but he'd just throw them in when I wasn't looking. He was really hard work.
Yeah.
Half of it was just having to stay in the same room to make sure he didn't do something which killed him. Some of it was trying to stay in the room to see he didn't do something which killed us. And some of it was just trying to get him to stop breaking windows or whatever else he was doing at the time. So for a long, long time, it was just pain and lack of sleep. At some stage, he kind of seemed to realise that he probably got shouted at a lot less if he didn't do a lot of those things.
Right.
And he kind of started to mellow. He is still an evil genius. I come down every single day and I find where he has thrown some food at the wall, which I didn't see him do, and there'll be something that was once wet and slimy, which is now hard and crunchy and sharp, sticking out from the wallpaper. He will scatter crumbs all over the floor. Yes, he's still watching me. And he's still got that. I'm so good at that stuff. Don't leave money out. Don't leave phones out. Don't leave anything out that you value in any way, shape or form, otherwise it will disappear and be destroyed. I still haven't got a wedding ring back because he lost my wedding ring at some stage. I've never been able to find that. And I'm reluctant to get another one just in case it turns up. But he has started sleeping better. There are things he likes. He's a lot more predictable. It's the predictability of his evil, which is the most useful thing.
Yeah, that makes it easier if you can predict it because you can prepare yourself for it.
Exactly. Never leave him unguarded around water because he will be wearing it within seconds if he can possibly do it. So you just become like a Jedi master. It's really strange. I remember when he was still in his pushchair and I was in the middle of Boots and I'd given him an orange carton. And there was a couple of mums that got their kids. So they were just idly just chatting. And out of the corner of their eye, they saw him just cast up this empty orange carton into midair. And I just, without even looking, just caught it in midair. And they were just, how did you do that? And it was, you just trust in the Force. He's going to do it. I know he's going to do it. It's just what the trajectory is and whether I
That's
can get
like
my hand in there. And we became so instinctive with that.
that's amazing. That's like having like a caring superpower.
It was for a while. It certainly was for a while. The things he does aren't malicious, but they are repetitive, and he never stops. We just had a new bathroom put in his room, and it's all been nicely painted. We got someone to come in and do it for a change this time. And within a week, he's managed to bang 3 or 4 holes in it for no other reason than he just felt like it. So then we've got to repair those again. And it's frustrating and it's annoying. Just the normal wear and tear. I've had to throw another pair of shoes away today. These are steel toe-capped work boots. So I've had to throw away 6 pairs since January, which he's just smashed his way through.
Wow. Yeah.
So again, I know that's going to happen. So I have to have a pair of boots in spare all the time. I have to have a pair of smarter shoes ready at all time, which will last one journey.
Wow.
So you have it's almost like being a kind of a military supplies buyer, whatever they're called. You have to know that you've got enough ammunition and food and stores and things, and because he will, otherwise he just causes you mayhem.
And because you've been caring for such a long time, I know obviously that you've described how that's changed over the years, but what do you wish that you kind of knew at the start? What could have helped you at the start had you been told?
I'm not sure you can tell someone this at the start, but I wish I appreciated the whole 365 days a year, 24-hour care. I think there was always a kind of a strange thought that you might be able to just get better, that there might be an improvement to such a stage where it would just be a minimal thing. But there isn't, and I think being able to pace yourself, and especially psychologically, because at some stage it does occur to you that this is never really going to get better. It's always going to be one battle or another.
And sorry to interrupt, just to explain that, because I think that's such a hard concept for people to grasp when they're not in that environment, that it's not going to get any better.
No,
that it will just carry on.
These are not things that they recover from. They're always going to need some help. And that's a stupid thing. I always think about it as a kind of an analogy for a dinner party. Whoops, my kitten has suddenly appeared from nowhere. This was a bad idea.
Oh, really?
A good idea, but a bad idea at the same time. Basically, if you say people come round to my dinner party, but then you don't ask who's coming, and you don't ask about food requirements, etc., it's going to be a pretty shoddy dinner party, isn't it? But that's kind of what happens. No one counts how many people there are with special needs. No one can seem to plan for those numbers. And it just means that the reactions to it are poor, half thought out, a bit shambolic.
You mean reactions like government reactions?
Government reactions, yeah. I mean, for the everyday person, if you can imagine... every time that you want to go to the cinema, I can't. Everything you do with a family, we generally can't.
Yeah.
Going on holiday abroad, we haven't done. I haven't been out of the country now for 18 years.
Is that primarily because of financial constraints or respite, or?
Financial doesn't help. I mean, we're down to one income.
Yeah.
I was a fairly decent earner until I had to take over the care. But it's also the idea of Zach on a plane is terrifying.
Yes. Yeah.
I just kind of was getting over that. I'm thinking, I don't know, he might quite like it. He likes trains, he likes buses. And then one of my neighbours, whose son is not dissimilar to Zach, just had the worst experience on an aircraft because her son is kind of addicted to his tablet. And of course, the plane gets delayed on the tarmac. It's not going anywhere. There's no broadband. And he just screams. And he screams, and he screams, and he screams. And this is not a baby screaming. Let's face it, a lot of people really get upset about babies screaming on the planes. This is, to all intents and purposes, a young adult who is just bawling at the top of his voice.
Yeah.
No one wants to be in an aircraft with that happening. Now, Zach, because he's non-verbal, probably wouldn't do that. But if he suddenly decided he didn't want to be in that seat or didn't want to be it or didn't like it, I don't want to be sat next to him. I don't want to.
Well, he would get physical, wouldn't he? He would.
Yes, and he's strong
Yeah.
now. I mean, and we've got to that stage now where he tests. I mean, even though he is special needs and intellectual disability and autism, he's still doing the alpha male thing. He's still testing out to see how weak the old man's getting. And, he can move me out of the way if he needs to do that now. It's only because I'm a lot clever and a lot more evil that he doesn't get his way more often.
It's a battle of the evils.
It is. I can still strategize. Yes, I'm talking about you again. He's there kind of rubbing a beard he doesn't have, going, ha ha ha, but I will soon overpower you, old man.
So what do you think? So when we talk about the government and them being not able to plan or unwilling to plan for this dinner party, as we established, what do you want to see? What do you want to see them doing?
The first thing is take it out of the political system. Every time, every 5 years we have an election. So the new people come in and they stop everything that the previous regime did.
Yeah.
Even if it was a good idea, they stop it. Because it's just contrary to what their voters have voted for 90% of the time. So if we're constantly doing this and we're constantly changing the name of things and we're constantly just getting halfway there but never actually finishing anything, that does nothing for carers at all. I think they've changed the name of Asperger's probably about 3 times in my recent experience, which has achieved nothing. It just seems to be, we could actually do something that helps people, or we could just change the name of something. Oh, I know, let's go and change the name of something, because it's a lot easier. And that's what comes over all the time. It's kind of, we're going to change this protocol. But what does this protocol do for the people on, who are caring? It does nothing 90% of the time, or it makes things more complicated for no good reason. And it seems to be that whoever comes into power has listened to someone, generally from America, taking what they've said wholesale, despite their system being completely alien and different to ours, and just decided to implement it wholesale. And then, of course, within 2 months or 3 months or something like that, they've lost their ministerial post or they've moved on to something else. And the next person has come and said, oh, we're not going to do that. I don't like it. And there is no continuity. It should not be a slave to the electoral system.
Okay. And so if it's taken out of there and centralised into some kind of, I don't know, some other way of organising it, what would you have them do?
Create a kind of diagnosis, and I'm going to use the D word, to death, plan. A skeleton for their life, if you like. I think that's the only way. He's not going to get any better. He's not going to learn how to read. He's not going to learn how to write. He's not going to learn how to vote. He's not going to do a lot of the things that we do. I am going to do a lot. One of the things that most humans do. I'm going to die. And at some stage, he's going to keep going while I'm not there anymore. And I can't do anything to help him. As a carer, I need to know that there is a thorough plan, costed plan, and some kind of protocol for the rest of his life. Because he won't be able to do anything for himself.
And currently that doesn't exist at all? Or does it exist in some form?
No, there is a vague, he'll move on to assisted living. Where? I've met one gentleman whose son... I think was born in Bedford, but is now in a home in the far extremes of Scotland. And he gets to see him twice a year.
Why in Scotland?
Because that was they always sell these things, it's the best facility available. And my argument for that is there should be a best facility available everywhere we need them, which is every major town.
Well, surely the best facility available would be somewhere close enough for family to still be part of your life.
Yes, but you see, you're making the mistake of using logic and compassion there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, please try and think
right.
of how you're approaching this. It's being handled from finance point of view,
right.
always.
Yes. Right.
We don't have anything here. There is something somewhere else, is what I've experienced all the way from the caring and the education. And that's the other thing. Why divide education from health? A lot of the time they're the same thing with kids as intellectually disabled as ours. For me, education for Zach is learning how to put your clothes on the right way round. It's that basic.
Yeah.
Learning not to eat the toxic substance, learning not to walk into the middle of the road and be killed by the thing you were ignoring. That's education. And it's also obviously care. But the ministries don't like those two things being put together, so they try and distance themselves as much as possible. But that doesn't work, because then they're special schools. And I did visit quite a few special schools when he got kicked out of his. And I remember I was talking to one of the teachers, and as I was talking to him, there was one kid on his knees digging in the flower bed and rubbing the mud into his hair. And he was being watched by another child. And the teacher pointed the child who was watching very proud and said, "Oh, he's a high flyer. He's been recruited by intelligence services because his IT skills are so good." It's kind of, okay, let's take that apart a bit. Good for him, great. But how must have he felt for the last 5 years, being in the same facility where the other kid is rubbing mud into his hair? That's weird. That was a weird kind of grouping for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that say to both of them in some respects? Don't get me wrong, my son would have been the one rubbing mud into his hair as well as probably eating it. But it just seemed like a really strange thing. It's like a complete lack of understanding of the huge width of the spectrum. I have two kids on the spectrum. I have Zach, who is on what I would call the cuddly Labrador part of the spectrum, and my daughter is the spiky Asperger's super genius at certain things.
Right.
And they're incompatible in many ways. He really gets cross at her voice. I don't know what that's about. And she just gets cross about his entire existence. So typical siblings in that respect.
Yes.
But, to say it was autism, you wouldn't think it was. So all this idea of everything is on the same spectrum, we don't use Asperger's, but we just call it autism. Again, doesn't really work for our family. And it annoys my daughter, which she says, well, I don't want to be grouped in with him because, people just assume that I'm going to be rubbing dirt into my hair.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, these things are imposed on us without them actually asking. Or there'll be one very, very vocal Asperger's person who speaks for the entire world. And
yes, which is fine, but obviously because the spectrum is so vast, it's not relevant for one person to speak for all.
No, and actually the most intolerant people of autistic people, in my experience, is other autistic people.
Really?
Yeah, because they have their own specific ways of doing things, and if someone's doing something in a different way, it's evil. It's not wrong or slightly, oh, well, that's your choice. It's evil. It is just plain evil. That shouldn't happen. And it's kind of funny from the outside because it's just how neurotypical people are, but they actually say it. They actually say it out loud.
But going back to what you said before about wishing that there was a plan for you and for Zach after you die, would that give you enough comfort is that the main source of discomfort for you, other than the fact that it's relentless?
That's the thing that wakes me up at 3:00 in the morning. That's what put me on antidepressants for a year. That's the thing that had me put my son on a bus one morning and then wake up on the sofa where I thought I'd just sat down for 2 minutes when his bus came back 6 hours later. And I had no memory of that day whatsoever. It's a weird thing to try and get over to people who don't have this. But he's basically saying, in my life at the moment, there is an absolute certainty that my son will be killed by a shark. There is a threat, there is a danger, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. Because at the moment, all I see is this dismal, total lack of joined-up care, where small agencies employ incredibly under-equipped and not top-drawer staff who are unmotivated and are not paid well. Don't get me wrong, I've met some great care staff. There are some wonderful care staff out there. I've also met some people who you were literally wondering how they could breathe and talk at the same time because they were so stupid. So it wasn't encouraging. I can't live with that. I can't live with the idea that my son, who can be difficult, who can be a little bit physical sometimes, is going to be the hands of men who are poorly paid, impatient, possibly don't speak the language very well, and are culturally different. It's difficult. When he was first diagnosed, the pediatrician was from somewhere else. And how she described this to us was, "Oh, it's okay, you've got another child, everything's fine." And it was, thanks. Okay. Then she gave us a big heap of leaflets to read and chucked us out the door, and we had to get into the car and come back, both of us almost blind with tears by this stage because, what had actually happened. Come on. And it was only when I thought about where this paediatrician was from, and then you look up the death rates in those countries, it makes a lot of sense.
It's a different mindset.
It's a different mindset. It's a hugely different mindset. And I get it. It's not a culture. I'm glad she's here. I'm glad she's working here. And I'm glad she's doing things for people here. But it's a very different mindset. We don't have lots of children. I have 2, both of whom have special needs. I don't have a spare. And even if I did have a spare, that wouldn't take away from what I feel for the other 2. So, when you're expecting a baby, when you're pregnant, you have this little fantasy life of what they're going to be like. When they're very, very young, they're doing a lot of kicking, they're going to be a football player. Or, it's obviously very intelligent, but she keeps stroking her chin. And suddenly that gets chopped off completely. My son was going to be the surfer dude who probably went and tickled sharks in the Caribbean or something as a research scientist or something like that. He just had that whole demeanour about him, surfer dude. And that's not what I've got. No. He'll definitely go and play with a shark, but he'll probably drown himself at the same time. And he definitely won't be doing any science whatsoever, I hope. So for me, it was brutal in several ways. And all this paediatrician seemed to be thinking at the time was, I'm really hungry, I need a sandwich, off you go now. You've got, you've got nothing to worry about in your comfortable Western existence.
I've always thought that actually, after diagnosis, there should be some kind of. It's almost like you're bereaved. Because you've got to grieve for the life that you thought you were going to have.
Oh, absolutely. I've talked to
and that there should be some kind of bereavement counselling offered, or something like that, or because it is a grief. You have to go through the process of grief.
Definitely. I mean, I have friends who've lost children, and half of the reason why we bond is because it's exactly the same. Yes, I have a physical child, and yes, I love him very much, and yes, he has his own distinct personality, but he's not in some respects, the child I was expecting.
No.
He's very, very different. We have grown used to that, but initially, you're right. It was a death of an idea more than it was a death of a child. But it was all the expectations.
Yeah, but that idea is so strong that you have created this idea out of nothing. It's a fantasy, but it's very, very strong.
Yeah.
And it's very, very real for you. So
many things get affected by it. There are, no grandkids from his side. He's never going to be able to pick his own holidays. He's never going to be able to pick his own anything.
Yeah.
No girlfriends, no boyfriends, no anything. It's kind of all that is gone. No coming back and impressing us with his table tennis skills. It's kind of. If he manages to do a poo on the loo, we're ecstatic. And I think this is another thing that parents of neurotypical don't get. If that is a major triumph for the day. It won't happen again, but it's kind of like, that's a major triumph. And it does, every time the exam results come in, obviously, my wife feels it as well because she's a teacher and she has to go in for a GCSE and her A-level kids. And she's always delighted for them and she's always, it's a job well done, hopefully, a lot of the time. But, he didn't get those. He's not going to get those. He can't get those.
Yeah, there's always a sadness, I suppose, every single time.
Well, I think there is, and I say this to a lot of people. Nearly every carer I've met, underpinning them, there is a real rage. It's like a river that runs underneath the ocean. They say there's water at the bottom of the ocean, like fresh water, and it's just waiting. And it's just like someone will say something to you one day or will comment on your kid's behaviour. And this rage just comes spilling out. And it feels good.
And is that rage born from that grief, do you think? Like that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of times I've been in the park and, my son's kicking stuff constantly. And 90% of the time, it's nowhere near anybody, but it's an alarming sound, and especially if he's broken his boots and the metal is now scraping across the pavement. And just every so often, usually the father of a much smaller child who is probably 20 feet away has got a bit angsty about this. And there's that, do you think you can stop your kid from doing that? And it's instantly, whoa, here we go. I'm going to enjoy this. No. I've been trying for 20 years, but if you feel that you can have a go, you come on, have a go now. If you can do better, please have a go. And then you just spend about 10 minutes just eviscerating them until they're almost weeping. And by the end of it, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, just think, obviously we don't encourage these behaviours. We don't want them to do these things. But just think before you open your mouth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't give me that look. Don't give me the look. Please don't give me the look because
of the rage.
The rage is coming. And, I'm not the only one. I know it. And I know some parents just absolutely live for those days because they've got nowhere else for it to go.
Yeah. So just try me. I'll do it.
Oh, yeah. I was looking up some statistics actually before I came on this. I was just interested. I mean, apparently there's something like 2.5 million carers in this country.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. There's only 150,000 trained military personnel. So I reckon we could take them. I'm thinking 150,000. I mean, some of those are going to be like clerks and quartermasters and things, aren't they?
I know. And the thing is, this is why we actually, describe carers as a silent army because there are so many of them.
But why be silent?
Well, because I tell you what, I don't know. I don't think that they should be silent, but why they are silent is because they're so busy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they're segregated because they are so segmented into their different groups.
Yeah, the data privacy laws, it was almost like it was designed to stop us storming Parliament Because I reckon if I could basically put out one email to every single email address of every carer in the country, I mean, Extinction Rebellion would look like part-timers. They would, I mean, it was like, oh, you managed to turn up and close down the M25, did you? We could close down the entire country in
Well, I mean, I
moments.
definitely think that's true. I mean, if this group of people were galvanised and were brought together with a single request or need, then they would definitely be heard because there are so many of them. But the problem with it is that all the needs are different. So your need will be vastly different for somebody who's caring for an elderly dementia patient.
Yes.
So whilst you're both classed as carers, your needs are vastly different.
But this is why I say the skeleton and the structure, because it's not just about special needs kids. It's not. It's about everything. Every time there's a diagnosis, basically that's the key. Diagnosis, whether it's dementia or whether it's any of the various things, that should just happen straight away. You can't cure dementia at the moment. You can't cure autism. You can't cure any of these things. But what you can cure is the incompetence with which they're approached. Of course you can make that better. It's like, for an example, it was the guy who, the Earl of Sandwich, didn't like getting his hands greasy while he's picking up his sweetmeats playing cards, didn't like getting the greasy cards. So he invented something which made it work. He put the meat in between two slices of bread and he ate it like that. He solved it. He didn't solve greasy meat or sticky food, but he found a way of making that inconsequential. He made something that is universally popular everywhere. That's what we need. We need the bread solution.
Yeah. I like that, the bread solution. But the one thing I do think that carers have in common, even though they are a very segmented, broad-ranging group, one thing that every carer has in common is diagnosis. So everything that we've spoken about, that grieving for an unknown life, that all happens for everybody, whether they are diagnosed with dementia or diagnosed with something else. And I do think that's the linchpin, what happens at diagnosis and what happens to the carer at diagnosis.
Well, my mum died of dementia, stroke, Alzheimer's. So, I mean, I've seen that side of it as well. I lived with an alcoholic for 5 years. I've seen care systems and where they work and where they don't work. And for the most part, it's because they're administered with people who don't have a living experience of these things. So they miss all the important details.
Yeah. Which is kind of why I want to talk to carers and do this, because I think hearing from you and finding, giving you the time to tell us what it's like is just so, it's like the first step.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't think of ever getting to a Typhoon fighter and trying to get it off the ground and then do a combat mission because I have no experience in that. But every single politician who gets in charge of this generally has no experience of this. But they just push through with bluff confidence as though they know what they're doing, or they're relying on people beneath them who, for the most part, do. But I've still met some very, very educated people who didn't have a lick of common sense. I remember that they were going to close down one of the only respite centre in Bedford they tried to close down at one stage. And all the councillors had been asked to go and visit it, and one guy turned up. And I said, well, this is an awful place. It's absolutely horrible. I mean, I went into that bedroom over there, and, the bed is screwed down to the floor, and there's a metal grating over the window. Who would want that? And the carers, because they had experience, will say, well, that's for one specific client who, if you don't bolt the bed down, will smash it against the wall and will then throw it through the window. That's living experience. And the same guy said, oh, why can't we put the physically disabled in with the autistic and the intellectually disabled? And again, the carers were saying, well, the intellectually disabled will turn over the people in wheelchairs just to watch the wheels turn round.
Yeah.
It's horrible, but that's the reality
horrible.
of it.
Yeah, but it's reality. And it, it wouldn't be like you said, it's not obvious to those who just don't know.
No, it's beyond science fiction. But unless you actually ask us questions and listen to us, it's not all like that all the time by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes it takes your breath away how utterly inept some of the responses are.
Yeah, it's a big problem. It's a big problem, but it's like the sandwich, it can be solved.
It can be solved. We can. That's it. The individual details we can't solve, and we shouldn't even, in some respects, try. We just have to live with these things. But yeah, the sandwich protocol. Sounds like a terrible book. The sandwich protocol. No, it's not going to work.
I don't know. No, probably not. Mark, thank you so much for chatting with me today. That was so great. And it's so great to get an insight into what life is like for you and Zach.
I mean, the thing to remember is 3 weeks later, everything is funny.
Yeah.
It's horrendous at the time. You're wrist deep in gore. It's horrible. But at some stage, it's a good anecdote.
And it's good to keep a sense of humour, even if it's hard some days.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it's the Pandora's box thing. And this is quite bleak, but in some respect, hope was one of the first things I lost. But humour helps with that. Always feels like a kind of a Russian thing, doesn't it? It's like a kind of bleak thing. I should be drinking vodka and eating black bread or something. But that's how I've got now. I don't think anything's going to change until we have a prime minister, a chancellor, a health secretary, and an education secretary who will all have children with special needs. That's the only way they will actually ever understand what the issues are.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess it's easier for me to say I still have hope for that because, I do think people who aren't going through that situation can still be empathetic and still understand as long as they're good at listening. But
the trouble is another issue pops across every few seconds.
Of course.
It's migrants here, war here. Yeah. And these things, I mean, and one thing, I mean, obviously it's a contentious effort, the whole war front, but I haven't heard anybody say, oh, let's stop spending on arms and support. Whereas people are constantly saying, oh, you want a new school? Oh, I don't think we could afford that. And the school costs a fraction usually of one of those missiles. And that's the irony, is it's a choice they make. It's a choice to make a huge railway system. It's a choice to replenish things when they want to replenish. All of these are choices, and 90% of the time they do not choose to come up with the basic and, let's face it, money-saving thing of coming up with protocols from diagnosis to death.
Yeah.
You can plan for that. You can buy in from that. You can establish services from that. You can stop using small companies who don't know what they're doing. I'm all for small bits of private enterprise. I'm all for the NHS. They can work together, but you can't just set up a company because someone comes up with a bonzer idea for teaching autistic kids how to paint. My son will eat the paint. He'll probably stab you in the eye with a brush. Not all these solutions work for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I will go on and on otherwise.
I know. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, so thank you so much for that. And yeah.
And tomorrow, let's solve the economic crisis.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not?
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much.
So thanks again to Mark for joining me and chatting and sharing some of his experiences today. I'm sure you'll agree he has given us a lot to think about and a lot to consider about what is best for us as a community going forward. Obviously, for people like Mark, they're relying on other people to help because, as he explained, he's too busy with the day-to-day to get things done. So in terms of advocating, it's people like Mark who need other organisations and other people to step up and say, hey, these guys need some help. So that's maybe what we should do. I don't know. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. We will be producing more episodes going forward, so keep an eye out. Obviously, like, share, tell your friends, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to them. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Who Really Cares.